Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, I'm very excited to announce our guest, Tony Castronovo. Tony, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to get into your story. So, Tony is the founder and managing partner of Novo Multifamily Group and Novo Investments, real estate investment companies established in 2019 and 2014. Mr. Castronovo is a buy and hold investor and syndicator with 7 years focused real estate experience in both multifamily and single family, including acquisition, construction, operations, and property management. Awesome. Well, can't wait to dive into what you've learned over the years and some of the perspectives that you've gained. So, Tony, why don't you start us out with telling us, a bit of general background and how and why you got into real estate?
Sure. So, back in 2014 is when I made the active participation in real estate. And I think, like a lot of folks, you start watching the shows on TV and you start getting pumped up thinking, oh, I can go flip a house. And I bought into that a little bit as well. But I did, like a lot of folks did, where I got into single family investing, and again back in 2014, really just as another source of retirement income. And I really saw myself as more of a buy and hold investor. I did try some flipping just because it seemed sexy and exciting at the time, but I think it quickly taught me that really what my passion was to grow something, to be able to build a business and to be able to grow equity and cash flow. And so I transitioned from that single house and a couple of flips into really a small portfolio of single family homes. And, it was all done through self-management and, kind of turning the dial just a little bit at a time. And I learned a lot. I built processes and systems. And then eventually, when I was able to take that and scale it into multifamily in 2018, that's when I started bringing on partners and really trying to grow the business exponentially from there.
Awesome. So that's a great story. And I'd love to just touch on one of the things you mentioned in the beginning, which is you wanted an extra source of retirement income. Can you tell us a little bit about the mindset, whatever it was that you were the thinking behind wanting to increase your retirement income? Were you not like satisfied or confident in, what your W-2, I assume, was giving you?
Yeah, and actually, so even though that was my initial sort of catalyst for getting into it, that really quickly was not my why. Okay, I started looking at it thinking, all right, my retirement fund is going this fast and growing this large, or not. If you've been through some of the ups and downs of the stock market. And so that's kind of what got me going. But then I started realizing that I just wanted more control. I wanted the ability to decide on my own terms how I spend my day, and I wanted something to be able to build and grow on my own, and not necessarily trading time for money in all cases with a W-2 job. So I did something pretty risky, really. I took my 401k at the time and I cashed it out. And I know a lot of people would say, oh, well, you paid the penalty and you got the taxes and all that stuff. I understood all of those risks, but I decided I wanted to bet on me and not on some, stock market or mutual fund manager out there. And so I took a little bit of a setback, but I haven't looked back. I mean, I've made all that back up and then some. But really, my why is, I just want to eventually be able to leave the W-2 job. Like a lot of people talk about financial freedom. It's not about retiring and sitting on a beach somewhere and not working. It's about deciding how to spend my day and really seeing the direct result of all the efforts that I put into the daily work. That's really what drives me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's a big reason why I got into real estate too. And, I was not happy at any of the jobs that I was working with. And I had to realize at some point that the only common denominator was me. And I just wasn't happy being in that W-2 environment. And yeah, I think that's definitely what drove me at first, just to be the master of my own destiny and not to have to be beholden to, a certain schedule, a certain office hours, PTO, et cetera. And I think a lot of people, just undersell like how themselves and like how much they can accomplish and not have to necessarily be beholden to that. So in any case, I love that that's your story. What is your W-2 profession? You're still working in it. Is that what I understand?
I am, yeah. So for the last 25 years, I've been a management consultant, specifically around kind of a domain that we call project portfolio management, which is really all about helping clients to determine the best way to select investments in their projects, to optimize those portfolios, to get the best returns out of project investments. So it actually translates pretty well to real estate and, performing in a role of, say, an asset manager, where I'm taking properties and trying to optimize them and determining how best to place my investment or my investor's investment and get the best returns. So it's just kind of a different spin on it, I suppose, but it's all good training.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Okay. So, I know you you run marathons, and I know you have like developed some thinking on how it is that marathon running relates to investing in apartments or other sort of real estate. I'd love to just dive into that, and will you start us off with like, what is it that compares? How is it that running a marathon relates to real estate?
Yeah, and as you and I chatted, before our interview here, it's a fun way to kind of think about it, because there are a lot of things that translate between running a marathon, which I've run 24 of them. I'm training for my 25th.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. Um, there's a lot that you can learn from that translates into being a real estate entrepreneur. And I think the first one is, and this one's probably the one most people wouldn't think of right away, but it's the concept of team. So in running, they say if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you run with a team. And so that's something that I learned 20 years ago in training for marathons is, those people, I feel very sorry for somebody who trains by themselves for a marathon.
Yeah.
It's got to be really lonely.
Yeah.
And that can be the same thing for real estate investing, that I was sort of the lonely real estate investor when I was doing single family. I would be out there looking for deals. I would, do a lot of the work myself. I would do the property management. Sometimes I would hire contractors, but that was kind of later in my career of single family. But initially it was all me. And it was harder. And once I started thinking about the team concept and thinking about bringing on contractors so that I can back away and spend more time looking for new deals, or eventually bringing on third-party property management when I transitioned into multifamily, that was a big learning curve for me, and something that I think really helped me to get to another level. And I still think I've got a long way to go on that. I mean, I'm in a syndication right now where I am one of two general partners, and I've got 26 limited partners. I also run a solo multifamily deal, which, I'm the lonely solo guy over there, but I do have a property management team. I have a team of contractors, but, it's a concept that I think is hard for a lot of people, because, if you've done a lot of things on your own and you're very passionate, it can be hard to let some of that control go. But it definitely is needed, especially if you want to be an active investor in the multifamily space.
Yeah, I think there's so much there that you just covered, and especially the loneliness piece. I mean, yes, it's advantageous to align yourself with other team members for many reasons, like just to be successful. But I remember as well, when I first got started in real estate, I was doing my Airbnb business, and it was really just me. And I would spend just like the whole day without talking to somebody. And Yeah, it just I remember I actually went back to a W-2 job at some point. And I mean, I would, obviously I would like do other things out of the house and stuff, but in my professional work, I wasn't really talking to a lot of people except for maybe, my cleaner. Anyway, so I remember going back to W-2 job for a short time and just being grateful for the idea of like having coworkers. Like I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'll have like people to talk to during the day. Of course, it didn't end up working out like that. I didn't actually like being in a W-2 job still, but it can be lonely being on your own. So, and yeah, running a marathon too, those long runs. And I mean, I think that's why there are so many athletic associations. It's just more, I mean, it's not necessarily like you always have to train with a group, but it just keeps you going. There's something you get out of the energy, and it's different for everyone. But I certainly am one to train in a group too. So that's a great
Well,
thing.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think you kind of hitting on another kind of path here is the training, right? That you wouldn't set out to run 26.2 miles without some sort of training. And so kind of in a similar vein, you wouldn't just take on a syndication of a multifamily property without some element of training. Now you can go hire a coach and you can get some formal training and so forth. And I think that's fantastic. I think the biggest part of the training though is when you kind of have those networks, the clubs, as you said, you've got people you can model after, you can learn from, you can network, you can collaborate. And that's really, to be honest with you, how I got into multifamily was somehow I attended a couple of meetups and they were very focused on the multifamily space and actually syndication. And I didn't even know syndication was a thing. I just thought, well, listen, when I go from single family to multifamily, it's just a bigger property, it's a bigger building, more units, and maybe a different way to run it. But I didn't really think about all the part about capital raising and everything that goes into a syndication. And so that was part of my training. And so I encourage anybody to, model after others. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but make it your own. I mean, you don't want to just do cookie cutter. You have to look at something and then think, how would I do it, make it better, without necessarily starting from scratch.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially when you think about a marathon, like pretty much no one that I can think of would say, I'm going to do a marathon and then not have some kind of training plan in place. I mean, someone might do like a 5K or a Spartan race, or even like um, even like certain longer bike rides. But a marathon is not something that pretty much anyone who's not totally crazy would do without training. And it's true with real estate too. Like it's a large enough endeavor that it requires a certain amount of it's an a certain amount of actually gaining knowledge and experience. And people, there's a saying which I'm sure you're familiar with, like it's a marathon not a sprint, which definitely applies to getting into this space. So I like that a lot. Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
and so just to unpack that a little bit, because I agree with you, and yeah, that's a common phrase, but you know, pacing yourself is something you would do in a marathon, right? And that can be hard because you're surrounded by thousands of people and everybody's running their own race. And some are faster, some are slower. You may think you need to run as fast as somebody else, but they've trained and they've planned, and that's their race. So that can happen in real estate as well, is that you see people with success and you say, oh, well, he just closed on a 125 unit deal. Well, why can't I close on a 125 unit deal? Well, maybe, he took a different pathway, or maybe, he's doing something that, you don't know. And so it's something you've got to bring inside and say, here's my plan and here's how I get there. Here's how I define success, and realize that it's a long game. It's not something that you're gonna race through. It is something that you're gonna have ups and downs and bad patches, and you've got to make corrections along the way, but it's your race to run.
yeah, for sure. Totally. It's such an important thing is And I think that people who tend to do endurance sports, I mean, well, some people are competitive, of course, but I think once you start getting into the longer distances, it really is a competition with yourself more than anything else. I mean, unless you're at like the professional level. And so, um, yeah, and it's which is actually kind of liberating, right? I mean, it's just such a liberating thing, I think, to actually release that idea of competition and not necessarily always be comparing yourself to someone else, but just comparing yourself to who you were yesterday or how you did your training last time, and like just look at yourself as a whole person and how you actually, want to strive. And anyways, so I really, yeah, I really like that as well. And then just like a little anecdote about when I ran a marathon. I remember the first and only marathon I ran. I was pretty young, and I just remember running with this woman and chatting her up, and then at some point, like probably around mile 8, she's like, you're starting to breathe like a little bit hard, and I'm starting to hear your breathing. I'm going to just go ahead and, you just like hang back and, try to like moderate your breathing. And I didn't know her, and she was giving me this advice, but at the same time I'm like so grateful. And she was like older, right? And so here I am thinking that I'm young and I should be like, able to keep up with this like older person. But like I'm so grateful to her to actually, who knows how the rest of my race would have went if I kept running at that like 8-minute mile pace or whatever. So anyway, so yeah, pacing yourself and running your own race, so such important things.
Yeah, well, hey, that's fantastic. You got a, spontaneous coach along the way.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, so I mentioned the term bad patches as well. So that I don't know if that's
Oh,
just
oh,
a
bad patches.
bad patches.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a term that I've just heard a lot of runners say. Like for me, a bad patch is somewhere probably mile 14 to 16, and I have another bad patch around 20 to 21. I think a lot of it's more mental than physical, but I think for me historically, those have just been parts of the race where I just have a low spot. And so I think in real estate, you're going to have those low spots too. I think it was maybe last fall, we had a storm that came through. I actually think it was a tornado, but we basically had a carport at one of our multifamily properties that got all twisted up. All the metal got twisted up, and thankfully no cars were damaged, no people were hurt, but it was thousands of dollars of damage. And that was kind of a bummer. But it
Definitely.
happens,
Hmm.
and so you're going to have things like vacancy, you're going to have some bad tenants, you're going to have evictions, and it's still all part of it. It's all part of the race that we run as real estate entrepreneurs and operators. And you just have to keep your chin up, work on your mental game, and I think maybe the other analogy, the other part of that is you need a cheering section,
Hmm.
right? You
For
need
sure.
people on the sideline pumping you up, because if you don't celebrate those wins and keep a smile on your face and understand you're going to get through the bad patches, you're going to kind of burn yourself out pretty quickly on that race. And that's clearly not where we want to be.
Yeah, I love that so much. I mean, well, you mentioned two things there. So one of them, the cheering section, I mean, it makes so much sense when you think about like if someone's going to run a marathon, like of course you want to go and cheer for them, right? I mean, it's just like, of course, it's going to be an incredible mental feat to get through that entire course with your chin up, right? And having a cheering section, and it just makes so much sense. And we need that in multifamily too, or whatever it is that we're doing with as entrepreneurs. Like we need people to help remind us that what we're doing is really awesome. Remind us why we're doing what we're doing, and remind us that from their perspective, they think we're doing great, at least for the most part. So I love that very much. My partner, it's not his natural inclination to be a cheerleader. He's a little bit more understated than that, at least with that sort of realm. And so, anyway, so yeah, but the importance of having cheering squad is important. And then I also liked the bad patches, I mean, I think I remember like when I first got into entrepreneurship, just kind of being slightly annoyed when things would go wrong, like, like just kind of like groan, like, I don't want to deal with that, But then, over time, just building up a certain amount of resilience and understanding that things are going to come up. And that's part of this, the journey that I have embarked upon is problem solving, and that's part of why I've chosen to do what I'm doing so that I don't have to go to a cubicle or an office every day for the next 30 years of my life. And so one of those trade-offs is, solving problems. And actually what that does for you is it turns you into, the person that you want to be, that you need to be in order to continue to run the business successfully. So I really like both of those.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned, your partner, your family being part of the cheering squad, if you will. So I think that's an important part, is to talk about it, to be aligned with your spouse, your family. My kids are actually investors. So my twin boys are 18 years old, and they are investors in a deal, and it's something that we've talked about. Unfortunately, they've had to hear me, go through this so much and talk about things like equity and cash flow, and they've learned along the way. And they started asking about, hey, can we invest in a deal? And I said, of course you can. However, there are two requirements. First requirement is you've got to save up at least $1,000, which, back when they were like 14, 15, that's kind of a lot of money. And so they saved that money before they could invest. And the second thing was, I said, you have to be educated investors. You cannot invest in a deal if you don't understand how you're going to make money out of the deal. You need to understand what your returns are made up of, and how you're going to get them, and how they could fluctuate based on how we run the business. And so they get statements every month, and they get, reports and explanations and so forth. And so it's kind of been an interesting journey, but that's a way to have your family be part of your cheering squad.
Yeah, I love that. And so just curious, what do you think it was that compelled your kids to, ask you that question? Can we invest?
Well, other than the fact that their savings accounts were earning a penny a month.
So you would talk about that at the dinner table or
we would, yes.
yeah.
I mean, they're kids with accounts, and they, are curious, how much money do I have, Dad? And so, every couple of months I'd be like, well, you have 3 cents more than you did last time, and that was kind of deflating.
Yeah.
So there was that aspect, but I think the other part was, you know, I mentioned to you, offline here, that I'm a pretty hands-on investor. So I go pretty much every week to visit my properties, and I've taken my kids with me on a lot of these visits. And sometimes, they're helping do some construction, maybe they're tiling a kitchen backsplash, or, maybe they're laying asphalt, or, something to participate in the property. And that's great. They made money. They traded, time for money, but they started asking questions about, well, if I don't really like laying asphalt, is there a better way for me to make money? Because all your investors are making money and they're not doing this. So how can I do it? And so I got into explaining it to them, and they had to listen to a few podcasts along the way too on the drive.
Yeah. Nice. I love it. Yeah. Just helping them, encouraging them to take in certain kinds of information. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's a great, so great tips on getting your family involved in your journey as a real estate investor. Anything else that comes to mind, like as far as that, translating between marathons and real estate?
Well, I think, there's the whole start line and finish line too, right? We talked about everything inside the race, but, the start line, I would put an analogy to say, okay, so you've done all the work and the training to get to the point where you've got a deal, right? Now you're in that start line corral, and the nerves are high, and you're trying to figure out, why am I doing this? How did I get involved in this? I've got to take over this property tomorrow when we close. Right. So the work just begins once you take over a property. And I think as you continue to do it more and more, it becomes, I'm not going to say routine, because every day is different, but I think you develop more confidence that you can tackle some of these problems that you talked about solving. And you have more people in your sphere that you can bounce ideas off of and work through those problems together. So I think that's a big part of getting out of the starting chute and into the race. But when you get to the finish line, all that pain that you've gone through in 26.2 miles, it goes away, right? When you finally turn that property from kind of the maybe the dud that you found and got a great deal on into something that you can be proud of, and not just the physical attributes of the property. Yeah, you've done your renovations and made it look nice, but to transform the community and to see it, change from, and I got to tell you, like one property, I had I had tenants who were really rough. I mean, police would call, you got your tenant throwing a TV off the balcony. What do you want us to do? From that to, showing up and seeing people with wreaths on the doors and, decorating and
Yeah.
holidays and kids and playgrounds. And, it's such a transformation. And, that's the finish line. That's the rush.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can so relate to that. Well, I mean, yeah, that feeling of like, I mean, at least, with my business, I do Airbnb, and, no walking on there through the property on New Year's Eve just to like make sure that there's like no parties going on, but like just hearing everyone like enjoying themselves and like having like spending their holidays. I mean, at least for me, that's what it is. And like really loving to live in the place and like, having special occasions there for multifamily. It's so what I'm curious on those properties, how it is that you transitioned from like a place where people were throwing TVs to a place that, had more of like a home, a home like community environment.
Yeah, so there's the on paper approach and then there's reality. And so the first one, I think that's probably the best example. The first multifamily property I took over, it was a small multifamily. It was 20 units. And so every tenant was actually month to month. There were no like term leases in place. And so what I had told the bank was, okay, we're going to keep occupancy high. We're going to keep it at 90%. And every 2 months, we're going to release two tenants and we're going to renovate those units, bring them online, and then rinse and repeat. And that sounded so great on paper, right? It was great for the contractor and his crew. It was great for our cash flow. But what I quickly realized in just the first month was critical mass. You have two nice units out of 20. Who wants to go move into a property that's 90% awful and 10% good? So next phase of our project, the second month, we basically ripped the band-aid off and we said, we're taking the hit. We're gonna take on 5 to 6 units at a time, and we're gonna blaze through this thing. And we renovated that entire property in under 7 months and leased it all the way up to 100%, and we're
Wow.
stabilized that quickly.
Mhm.
And that made a big difference. And then,
Yeah.
just when you're there and you show tenants that you care and that they should care,
Mhm.
and everything you do to coach your property management team, all of that makes such a difference.
Yeah, for sure. Totally. Yes. Really having that sort of human touch and investing in a place and the lives of the people who are there. And, it's their home. It's a place where they want to have a sense of dignity. And if you can really do that as an owner, then it's provides so much value to all your tenants and the community as well. So, um, awesome. Well, is there anything else you want to touch on before we start to wrap up, Tony?
I think that's it. I think we're entering the finish line.
Oh yeah, the finish line. Totally. Yeah, also just to touch on something, I remember I like how you gave your sons a goal to save $1,000 before they had to invest. Like I remember having like having a savings account since my mom opened one for me when I was like 5 years old. And there was always like a few $100s in there, from birthdays or whatever. And then I had like a tutoring job. But no one ever said to me like, well, you can do this when you save $1,000. And like, I just know that the way my brain works, right? Like that I would have like tutored like, 5 times a week or whatever it took to get to that $1,000 to get that thing that I want. And so like, that's just like an importance, similar to like marathons and stuff, like setting a target, right, for yourself. So important from a mental perspective.
Yeah. I think it's the whole mindset too, right? Because my kids would always make fun of me every time we drove over to Lowe's, and I would maybe opt on the cheaper light fixture versus the very shiny, expensive one.
Yeah.
And they would basically say I was cheap.
Right.
And once they became investors and they understood that if you take that differential on price and divide it by a cap rate, all of a sudden, they see we could generate this much more value if we were just more frugal about it. And so it's something that I think, over time starts to translate, hopefully, into good habits over time.
Totally. It's such a good point. Like, I think people who've never actually have that context of actually trying to run a business and get the numbers to pencil. Just don't have, they have these really unrealistic ideas about what can be done or what ought to be done. So it's really cool that you were able to parlay some of that knowledge and experience to your sons, at such a young age. Are they like set on being real estate investors now?
No.
Okay.
Well, maybe on a passive standpoint, but they do not want to be active real estate investors. They are not hands-on. But they enjoy watching their money grow. That's for sure.
Something most people can relate to. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tony, for coming on. Before we hop off, please tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm certainly on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website, which is novomultifamilygroup.com. You can also email me at tony@novomultifamilygroup.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for all those pearls of wisdom. As an athlete, I just loved the arc of our conversation. And Tony, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.